My mom was 40 when she finally popped out my brother Mason, because she was obsessed with some pseudoscience bullshit about caloric restriction leading to immortality. She only ate one meal a day during her pregnancy. The result? She was malnourished as hell. Mason was premature. He weighed 4 pounds soaking wet when he slid out. The doctors pleaded with her to put Mason in the NICU, let the nurses handle him, and pump him full of preemie formula. Mom wasn't having it. She snapped, "My son needs to be like me. He needs to maintain a sense of hunger. That's the verifiable secret to living forever." She didn't give a damn what the medical professionals said. She insisted on breastfeeding him herself, which was a joke since she was starving herself. Terrified the kid was going to croak, the doctor tracked down my dad. Dad spent a whole day screaming at Mom until Mason was finally shoved into an incubator. Watching my brother's tiny stick-like limbs twitching under that blue UV light, I felt absolutely nothing. 2 weeks later, Mason was out. Mom snatched him from the nurse like she was reclaiming a stolen purse and discharged him immediately. Back home, Mom started her starvation therapy. She fed Mason once a day. That's it. Mason couldn't handle it. The kid screamed his lungs out from hunger, sometimes crying until he literally passed out from exhaustion. Dad had already bolted back to the oil rigs in North Dakota. He wouldn't be back for 6 months. He knew Mom was that shit crazy, so he hired a night nurse to watch the kid. But the second Dad's truck turned the corner, Mom fired the nurse. Some nights, I'd wake up to Mason wailing and Mom whispering her insane mantra in the dark. "Sure, Mason. We don't eat. That's how we make it to 100 years old." Mason was a few months old. He didn't understand longevity. He just knew his stomach was eating itself. Listening to his cries, I put in my earplugs, kept my face stone cold, and went back to sleep. Because I've done this already. I was reincarnated. In my last life, Mom starved him just like this. Mason used to come to me with tears in his eyes, begging, "Harper, please, my tummy hurts." I was weak. My heart broke for him. I used to sneak him snacks constantly. Later, when he got sick, he blamed me. He said I ruined his longevity. When my asthma flared up, he hid my inhaler and watched me suffocate. This time, I'm not messing with his destiny. Thanks to Mom's starvation regime, by the time Mason was 1, he weighed 16 pounds. He looked like a shriveled alien compared to the other toddlers. The suburban moms in our gated community would gather at the park to humble brag about their kids. My mom would puff out her chest and say, "My Mason is such an angel. He never cries, never fusses. He just eats his one meal and sleeps." The other moms looked at her with envy, praising her for birthing such a chill baby. Only I knew the truth. Mason didn't cry because he learned early on that screaming didn't produce milk, so he saved his energy. He slept all day because his body was literally shutting down to conserve calories. Dad tried to argue with Mom at first during his brief visits, but seeing that the kid wasn't dead yet, he stopped caring. I was attending college locally. Every time I came home, Mom would nag me to join her starvation cult. Sick of her voice, I moved into the dorms and stayed there. I worked double shifts during breaks just to avoid that house. 3 years later, it was time for Mason to start preschool. He was stunted, short, slow, lethargic. The school realized he couldn't keep up and suggested putting him in the toddler room. He fit right in with the 2-year-olds. You couldn't even tell the difference. Mom told the teacher strictly, "Mason only requires 1 meal a day." The teacher thought she was joking or that Mason just had a small appetite. Being a decent human being, the teacher fed all the kids breakfast and lunch. She was shocked to see Mason attack the food like a feral animal, licking the plate clean every time. First week of school, the teacher posted a video in the parent group chat of Mason eating, captioning it, "Mason is such a good eater." Mom saw that notification and went nuclear. She didn't even change out of her house slippers. She drove straight to the principal's office. When the teacher tried to explain basic biology, Mom started shrieking about how they were poisoning him with calories. She demanded the teacher be fired. The principal, realizing Mom was unhinged, refused to fire the teacher and instead suggested Mason find another school. Mom dragged Mason out of there, cursing them all to hell. By the time Mason hit elementary school, he realized he was a freak. Other kids had shiny, thick hair. Mason's hair was sparse and looked like dead straw. The bullies had a field day. They called him Skeletor and Strawhead. Mason would cry and try to fight them, but he had zero muscle mass. He couldn't run. He'd take 3 steps and gasp for air. One day, he tripped on flat ground, scraped his arm. It wouldn't stop bleeding. The teacher rushed him to the ER. The doctor said Mason's platelet count was dangerously low and his blood wouldn't clot. Malnutrition, plain and simple. Mom refused to admit it had anything to do with her starvation gospel. She screamed at the doctor right there in the hospital room. "You hacks just want to squeeze money out of my insurance. You're making up diseases." I knew hospitals were scams. She turned to me. "Harper, you're a college student. Tell him I'm right." I nodded. Bored. "Yeah, Mom. Sure. Whatever you say." Feeling validated, she went back to verbally abusing the medical staff. Later at home, I was sitting at the table eating a greasy cruller and drinking a latte, doom scrolling on my phone. Mason watched the donut in my hand, his stomach making noises like a clogged drain. He swallowed hard. Checking to make sure Mom was in the other room, he shuffled over to me and whispered, "Harper, I'm so hungry. Can I just have one bite?" I pretended I was deaf. I took a huge bite of the cruller, letting the sugar glaze flake off. Mason's stomach roared. He couldn't take it. He reached out and grabbed a donut strip. Just as he was shoving it into his mouth, Mom walked in. She slapped the food out of his hand, yanked him behind her, and pointed a bony finger at me. "Damn it, Harper. If you want to die young, fine. But don't you dare ruin Mason's karma." I didn't back down. "Your son grabbed it with his own hand. Watch your kid better if you don't want him scavenging for scraps." Mason started crying, reaching for the donut on the floor. "Mom, it's not fair. Why does Harper get to eat 3 times a day, and I can't?" Mom hugged him, cooing. "Harper is going to get married and leave. She's not truly family. Let her eat herself to an early grave. You're different. You are the only heir to this family, my precious boy. You need to live to be 100. Mom had found this hunger longevity theory on some obscure conspiracy forum. She treated it like the Bible. I picked up the dirty donut from the floor and tossed it in the trash. I looked at Mason. "Hear that? Mom says no. Be a good boy and starve or you'll ruin your karma. Don't want to die young, do we?" I grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. In my last life, I stayed local after graduation to feed Mason. This time, I studied my ass off, got my teaching credentials, and moved to a mid-sized city 3 hours away to teach middle school. To keep Mason pure, Mom cut off his allowance, so he couldn't buy contraband snacks at school. Mason called me constantly, begging for 10 or 20 bucks via Venmo. I knew he was starving, but I used Mom's logic against him. "Harper, please, I'm dying." He whined into the phone. "Just send me cash. I'll eat secretly. Mom won't know." I smirked. "Can't do it, kid. It'll ruin your karma." Mason got nasty. "Harper, you bitch. Send me the money, or I'll tell Mom you made me eat." Threatening me? Cute. I hung up and immediately forwarded the recording to Mom. Caption: "Your longevity boy is trying to buy snacks at school. Guess he wants to die early." Mom exploded. When Mason got home that day, she tore apart his backpack like she was searching for drugs. She found a granola bar wrapper another kid had thrown in there by accident and lost her mind completely. "You disgusting little pig," she screamed. "You're trying to poison yourself." Mason sobbed so hard he threw up stomach acid onto the carpet. Mom took his bedroom door off the hinges after that. She started checking his breath every night to see if she'd smell food on him. She locked the fridge with a bike chain. She even weighed him every morning and every evening, convinced calories were hiding somewhere inside him. The crazy part? He actually started gaining weight. Not much, but enough. Because once you've been starving your whole life, your body clings to every crumb like treasure. Mom noticed immediately. She became obsessed. One weekend, she drove him to some lunatic wellness retreat in the mountains run by a bald man who claimed he hadn't eaten solid food in 11 years. The place smelled like mildew and incense. Everyone there looked half dead. Mom donated almost all her savings to the retreat. Mason called me crying from a bathroom stall. "Harper, please, I can't do this anymore." His voice sounded weak and raspy, like paper rubbing together. I remembered another life. In the last timeline, this was where I folded. I drove up there immediately. I snuck him burgers and protein shakes. I rescued him. Then years later, he stood over me while I clawed at my throat searching for my inhaler. "You're the reason my body is corrupted," he'd whispered while I suffocated. So this time, I leaned back on my couch and muted the TV. "You should listen to Mom," I told him calmly. "She's trying to help you live forever." Silence. Then I heard him crying again. "You hate me." I smiled faintly. "No, Mason. I'm respecting your destiny." I hung up. 3 months later, I got the call. Mom had collapsed at the retreat. Severe electrolyte imbalance. Cardiac arrest. Apparently, immortality doesn't pair well with eating cucumber slices and licking Himalayan salt lamps. She survived, barely, but the state got involved after the doctors saw Mason. The kid was 12 years old and weighed 53 pounds. 53. CPS removed him from her custody immediately. Mom fought like hell in court. She screamed at the judge that modern medicine was a government conspiracy to shorten human lifespan. She accused CPS of being agents of big agriculture. The judge looked horrified. Dad finally flew back from the rigs looking older, fatter, and annoyed more than concerned. Mom losing custody should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The second CPS took Mason away, Mom went completely feral. She started camping outside the foster office in her bathrobe holding handmade cardboard signs that said feeding children is government mind control. She uploaded hour-long videos crying about how they were fattening Mason for slaughter. In one clip, she claimed apples contained hidden aging chemicals developed by pharmaceutical companies. The videos got traction. Not with sane people. With conspiracy freaks. Soon, random weirdos were mailing her alkaline fasting crystals and jars of gray powder that smelled like dirt. Mom acted like she'd become some persecuted prophet. Meanwhile, Mason was in the children's hospital under observation because his body was reacting violently to regular meals. The first week, nurses caught him stuffing dinner rolls into his pillowcase. The second week, he stole pudding cups from another patient's tray. The third week, he bit an orderly. Dad hated every second of it. He'd stand in the hospital room rubbing his temples while doctors explained trauma-related food aggression. "So what?" Dad snapped once. "You telling me my kid turned into a damn raccoon?" Mason sat silently in the bed eating saltines so fast his fingers shook. Then one night, Dad made the mistake of locking away snacks. Huge mistake. Around 2 a.m., Mason smashed a ceramic lamp against the wall, climbed onto the counter, and tore through the cabinets like an animal. Nurses found him crouched on the floor eating dry pancake mix with his bare hands. After that, the doctors recommended intensive therapy. Mom used that in court immediately. "They're calling my son mentally ill because he practices discipline," she screamed at the custody hearing. The judge looked exhausted. Then Mom made things worse. Way worse. She brought Mason a detox smoothie during supervised visitation. The social worker tested it afterward. There was laxative powder in it. Mom insisted she was cleansing his corrupted digestive system. That stunt killed her case instantly. Supervised visits got revoked. Mom snapped. She started blaming me publicly online. According to her, I had seduced Mason into gluttony because I was jealous he was destined for immortality. She posted childhood pictures of me beside photos of obese strangers as proof of what normal eating does to people. My coworkers found the posts. Middle schoolers found the posts. One kid asked me during class if my mom was in a cult. I said yes, and continued the lesson. Then came Thanksgiving. Dad decided it'd be the perfect wholesome family holiday. Idiot. He invited me over without telling Mom. The second I walked in, Mason froze. He was 14 by then. Taller. Heavier. Still awkward looking, like his body had been assembled too late. The dining table looked insane. Dad had cooked enough food for 20 people because Mason panicked if the fridge looked empty. There were 3 turkeys. Mason kept glancing at them nervously like they might disappear. Then Mom arrived uninvited. She marched in carrying a Tupperware container full of boiled kale sludge. Dad stood up immediately. Oh, hell no. Mom pointed at the food spread like she was witnessing a satanic ritual. You are killing him. Mason started sweating. Dad yelled back. Mom screamed louder. And right in the middle of it, Mason snapped. He lunged across the table grabbing food with both hands. Turkey, rolls, mashed potatoes, stuffing. Just shoving everything into his mouth while tears poured down his face. Nobody moved. Nobody even spoke. We just watched him choke down fistfuls of food like someone was about to take it away forever. Then he threw up across the tablecloth. Mom started crying. Dad started cursing. Mason collapsed onto the floor, hyperventilating. And I sat there drinking wine. That night, Mason texted me for the first time in months. Why didn't you help me sooner? I stared at the message a long time, then typed, because last time I did, you murdered me. Scene. No response. After that, the nightmares started getting worse for him. He'd wake up screaming about people choking. He started sleepwalking too. One night Dad found him standing in the kitchen holding one of Mom's old fasting pamphlets while whispering, I didn't mean to kill her. Dad thought he meant Mom. I knew better. Mason became obsessed with the idea of reincarnation after that. He read forums, watched psychic videos, paid sketchy online mediums. One of them apparently told him, the person you betrayed followed you into this life. After that, he became terrified of me. He stopped being angry. Now he was scared. Good. Then Mom disappeared. For 2 whole weeks nobody knew where she went. Until police found her living with some desert commune in Arizona where people claimed sunlight could replace protein. She'd nearly died again. This time, she blamed negative energy attacks from her daughter. Dad finally divorced her for real after that. Mason didn't attend the hearing. By then he developed another problem. Shoplifting. Not for money. For food. He'd steal candy bars, chips, jerky, anything easy to hide. His apartment got so packed with food wrappers it smelled rotten. Therapists called it trauma. I called it karma. Then came the voicemail. Middle of the night. Mason crying so hard he could barely breathe. Harper, I remember. I sat up slowly. He kept rambling. The inhaler. You were on the floor. I remember hiding it. I remember you scratching my arm, trying to get past me. His voice cracked. Oh my God. For the first time since being reborn, I actually smiled. Not fake. Not cold. Real satisfaction. Because now he had to live with it too. After Mason remembered, he unraveled fast. At first he tried apologizing. Constantly. He'd send paragraphs at 3 a.m. I know what I did. I don't know why I did it. Please talk to me. I ignored every message. That made it worse. Because guilt needs somewhere to go. Without forgiveness, it rots. Mason stopped sleeping. He stopped showering. He started binge eating until he made himself sick, then fasting for days afterward trying to cleanse himself like Mom taught him. He became both of them at once. The starvation cult and the gluttony. One weekend, Dad drove to check on him after the landlord complained about the smell coming from the apartment. Dad found towers of food containers stacked to the ceiling. Mold growing on pizza boxes. Melted ice cream soaking into the carpet. Hundreds of canned foods lined against the walls like bunker supplies. And Mason sitting in the middle of it all. Skin clammy. Eyes sunken. Surrounded by food, he was too terrified to eat. Dad finally lost it. You ungrateful little psycho, he screamed. Do you know how much money I've wasted fixing you? Fixing. Not helping. Fixing. Mason just stared at him and whispered. You left me there. Dad slapped him. Hard. Mason didn't even react. That scared Dad more than if he'd fought back. The next morning, Mason disappeared. Dad called me furious. If he contacts you, tell him to answer his damn phone. I already knew where he'd gone. Back to Mom. The two of them reunited like gasoline meeting a lit match. Mom had downgraded from conspiracy influencer to full-blown cult leader by then. She rented a decaying farmhouse with 6 online followers who called her Mother Sage. They all looked half dead. When Mason arrived, Mom cried dramatically and hugged him. My precious boy finally escaped the poison. For while they enabled each other perfectly, Mom praised him for fasting. Mason praised her for trying to save him. Together they spiraled deeper into insanity. They started live streaming 24-hour fasting rituals, selling supplements, giving lectures about how hunger unlocked ancestral memories. Then one of Mom's followers collapsed during a retreat. Seizure. Severe dehydration. The woman's family sued immediately. Everything blew up after that. Reporters dug into Mom's history. The hospital records. The CPS case. The malnutrition. Pictures of skeletal little Mason spread everywhere online beside headlines calling Mom a child abuser and cult fraud. The internet devoured her alive. People dug up the old videos she'd made attacking doctors. Parents online called her a monster. Sponsors vanished overnight. Followers fled. Then the IRS got involved. Turns out Mother Sage hadn't been paying taxes on her supplement sales. The farmhouse got raided. News cameras filmed officers carrying out boxes of fake detox powder while Mom screamed barefoot in the yard about government nutrition agents. Mason was there during the raid. He completely broke. One clip went viral everywhere. A reporter asked him, "Do you believe your mother abused you?" Mason just stood there trembling, then quietly said, "I think we killed each other." People thought he meant metaphorically. I knew better. After the raid, Dad cut all contact publicly to save himself. Claimed Mom had manipulated everyone. Claimed he didn't know how severe things were. Nobody bought it, especially after old neighbors started talking. About the screaming. About how thin Mason always looked. About how Dad kept leaving for months at a time anyway. His companies suddenly found him bad for public image. They forced him into early retirement. Then his mistress left too after learning he was nearly broke from legal fees. By 58, Dad was living alone in a cheap apartment drinking himself numb every night. Mom's ending was worse. Way worse. She tried restarting her cult online under a different name, but nobody took her seriously anymore. People kept reposting the footage of police dragging supplement boxes from her farmhouse. Eventually, even her remaining followers abandoned her. Except Mason. He stayed. Out of guilt, maybe. Or punishment. Hard to tell. The final time I saw them together was at a grocery store. Funny place for them. Mom looked ancient. Not spiritually youthful. Just old. Skin hanging loose over brittle bones. Teeth yellow. Hands shaking from years of malnutrition. Mason looked even worse. Obese, but underfed somehow. Bloated face. Damaged joints. Hair thinning already in his 20s. Their shopping cart was chaos. Protein bars. Detox teas. Laxatives. Frozen dinners. They couldn't escape either side of the obsession anymore. Mom saw me first. Her eyes narrowed instantly. "This is your fault." I laughed. "My fault? You starved your own kid. You poisoned him against me." I looked at Mason. "You gonna hide another inhaler?" He flinched so hard he almost dropped the cart. Mom looked confused. Mason looked terrified. "Good." Then his hands started shaking. Right there in the frozen food aisle, he suddenly burst into tears. Not quiet crying either. Full body sobbing. People turned to stare. "I don't want to be hungry anymore," he choked out. Mom tried shushing him. He snapped. For the first time in his life, he screamed back at her. "I was always hungry." The whole store went silent. Years of misery came pouring out of him right there between the frozen pizzas and microwave dinners. He screamed about the hunger, the bullying, the hospital, the nightmares, the memories. Mom tried grabbing him, but he shoved her away so hard she crashed into the cart. And suddenly this woman who'd spent her whole life acting like a prophet just looked pathetic. Small. Fragile. Crazy. Security escorted them both out while strangers whispered and recorded videos. I watched them leave, mother and son, destroying each other all over again.